Welcome to Europe Explained, brought to you by the Council of Europe. This podcast series offers a unique window into what we're doing to create a fairer, more democratic Europe. Through conversations with experts and frontline workers, we bring you closer to the issues that matter, from fighting discrimination to upholding human rights, from defending democracy to building laws, systems and institutions that are just, fair and open to all.
Welcome to this new episode of Europe Explained, the Council of Europe's podcast that shares its work for human rights, democracy and justice. In today's episode, we're diving into the topic of teaching history. We're joined by three speakers who will share their perspectives on this important issue. Frances Moss, hello.
Hello.
You are the Vice Chair of the Governing Board and representative of the island of Ireland.
Yes.
You are a school inspector and you work for the Department of Education.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're also with Anne-Laure Lieval. Hello.
Hello.
You are a history and geography teacher in Lille, a lovely city in the north of France, and also a member of the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe. Mm-hmm. And finally, we are with Luc Gauci. Hello, Luc.
Hello.
You study European and global history at the University of Malta, another beautiful island, and one of your research papers was selected through the Observatory's open call for papers on history at Subject in Danger.
Yes.
Which we will be talking about. So it's great to have you in the studio all today. Let's answer the first question, if you're okay. Is the discipline of history facing unprecedented difficulties? And if so, why? If Frances, you would like to go first, maybe?
Look, while I agree that history teaching faces many challenges in today's world, we must remember that the challenges also provide opportunities as well. I mean, we're living in a world now with such polarised views, and we're also experiencing the use and abuse of information. And I suppose,
so on social media, internet.
Yes, yeah. All of that. And I suppose as teachers, it actually provides opportunities for us to seek out ways to guide and teach our students historical knowledge, skills, values with which they can make valid historical judgments, and indeed valid judgments in general. Okay, I mean, students, as you say, nowadays there is so much information available to them. So it's not a question about being able to access information. It's what they do when they do access that information. Are they questioning where it came from? Are they questioning the origins of the source, the motivations? And teachers are very important in guiding students to in that process of asking the questions to validate and to understand what is this being produced for, what messages is it trying to give, can it be relied upon? And I think that those opportunities are there for teachers to develop that more in classes. So yes, there are difficulties facing the discipline of history, but I think it's an opportunity for teachers to look at our practice and see ways that we can develop these skills within students to ask the questions and to inquire about the information that they're being provided with.
So it's not necessarily negative and...
Yeah, no, I think that as history teachers, we tend to use a range of sources within our classes. And I think for students to expose them to as many sources as possible, but to also very much encourage them to ask questions about the information that they're getting. Where did it come from? What's the motivation behind it? How reliable is it? The authenticity of the source? What does it tell us about the period of time? And to support them to make judgments about the quality of the information so that they can make informed discussions and analysis of things that have happened.
And Luc, is that also a topic that you've questioned in your different essays?
Yes, I think it all comes down to what Frances was saying. It comes down to critical thinking. I mean, the study of history, be it at any level, university or even before university, secondary school, develops a concept of critical thinking. Now, if you take the Maltese context, for example, we're seeing very few students actually applying to study history at O level. I think in Ireland it's a similar system. where you have statistics looking at students that actually sat for their exam. You have it. I have it written somewhere. Okay, yes. Have it between 2020 and 2024, this is. So in 2020, the actual number of students that actually sat for their O-level to study history as a subject was 54, compared with the 706 students that sat for accounts, for example.
So the first difficulty is less students.
Yes. The humanities in general always suffered in this matter. In Malta's case, in the 1970s, the Faculty of Arts was closed down because to make space for more, useful to society subjects, so law, engineering, or whatever. But still, that social stigma against history still exists till today. We have it right in front of us. I mean, by 2024, the number of students sitting for the O-level was only 311. So, I mean, it went up, yes, but not staggering numbers that way.
And Laure, you teach history. Do you feel that there's maybe a lack of interest in history, or are people really interested in these topics?
Oh no, I think there is a very strong interest into history among my students. They really like and enjoy the subject because it's very relevant to understand our societies and what is happening. But I agree also with, of course, Luc and Frances, because now in France we have this trial about the murder of Samuel Paty, and as David Colomb, maybe you've heard his name, he wrote a very interesting and very crucial book about the war of information, and he said that disinformation kills. So media literacy is so important, because what killed Samuel Paty is, of course, a lie, a lack of respect for a lesson made by a history teacher, not a history lesson, but a civic education lesson, and also the use and the misuse of social networks, digital social networks. And there is indeed this war of information against democracies, our liberal democracies. And made by, yes, authoritarian regime like Russia, like China, like North Korea or other regime. And so that's why, education, media literacy is so important. And, our students are aware of that. One of my students told me, Miss, I don't want to become a history teacher. I'm going to tell you why. It's not because I don't like history. I really enjoy the lessons of history. It's not because you are underpaid, even if you are underpaid. It's because he has a conscience that maybe our job is changing right now. There is a whole transformation of what is of the job of teacher because of this flow of information, students have access now, and maybe also because of AI, but there is also moral panic about AI that we can discuss later. So I was very impressed because this student is young. He's only 16 years old. He's in high school. He's not a bright or, the common or the best student because he doesn't have very good grades, but he has a very good critical thinking and very good mindset, I think. And he said, yes, I'm aware that you have a difficult job to do as a history teacher because we have access to all these videos on YouTube, TikToks, and so on. And that it's very difficult to teach and to help us, deal with all this flow of information.
And so we were talking about misinformation. How do you tackle it? How do you deal with it? Is it like treating the internet not like an enemy, but like a tool that you can use for different essays or access information? How do you navigate this?
I just wanted to say, because you comment about the uptake of history in Ireland, in Ireland, history is a core subject right through lower secondary, and then in upper secondary, students have an option. So just over 60,000 students would sit the final upper secondary exam, and about 12,000 of those students are doing history. So it's remained quite steady over the years. So that's about 20% of students that are doing history. So there's still quite a strong interest in the subject, and students get to choose from quite a range of subjects. So there's there is a lot of interest among students in history. And I think going back to your question, I think what's really interesting in the history classes is the ability of teachers to ensure that they're integrating different primary and secondary sources with students and engaging in dialogue with their students, taking that inquiry approach with them around, looking at the information and the contradictions even in the information and guiding them on how you analyse those sources to bring them to a point where they can make those decisions and have that critical awareness of what's being taught or what's being shown to them. And I think the emphasis on having a diverse range of sources, not just a textbook. There's so much more than the textbook that's available. And in Ireland, many of our archives have been digitised. We had a period known as the Decade of Commemorations where there was huge investment in digitising our archives. And this has opened the way for many people, for all people, to be able to access, but in particular for teachers to use these archives. So military pensions are there, and you can get testimonies from people that took part in the Civil War, the War of Independence, and you can use those in the classes with students as authentic sources. But even within those sources, they can see the different stories of people that are there. So I think in the history class, it's really important that the use of primary sources is integrated within that to enable and to guide the students and to develop those skills to analyse those sources so they can make judgments themselves in their own life as to what they're seeing. And, they start to view events and look through the different perspectives and be able to help them acquire a critical understanding of the past and to be able to understand then why things maybe have evolved the way they've evolved now.
And if we're trying to understand why history teaching is in danger, Luke, maybe you've studied that too in your essays. How does the influence of nationalist movements across Europe influence that? Because there's been a lot of laws to select historical narratives a bit. Is that also a problem in some countries across Europe?
Well, in Malta per se, I don't think it's a particular issue. We have our historical narrative. Yes, there are some grey areas that might be analysed more.
I was thinking of Poland, maybe.
But I was going to say I was actually thinking more of France, but Poland, but Poland as well. I mean, let's face it, as a country, Poland has been carved up I don't know how many times. So they have different versions of a different historical narrative. It all depends on how you look at it. In the Maltese context, for example, there is a stigma against the medieval period because in the 19th century we tried to make ourselves look more European and tried to cover the 200-ish years that we were part of the Islamic world. So it depends on where you are. In France, for example, I know that history teachers and based on historical narratives have been attacked for what they teach. Maybe you can go further into that.
Populism attacks are not new, because we had criticisms against our history curriculum since at least the 80s. Well, it started maybe before also in France, so it's not new. What is new is criticism not against the curriculum, but against the lessons, the history lessons made by a specific teacher. That's what happened to Samuel Paty, and also what is also happening to other teachers. History or French teachers have been threatened by parents or by Islamists because they showed naked art from the Renaissance, and so of course you have some naked people on these paintings. So what is new is that a civil servant, someone who is working for the French Republic, for the state, and a professional of education, is criticized, is questions, how his legitimacy is contested. And so in France particularly, it can be explained also because there is a teacher bashing atmosphere against school, against teacher. For instance, well, you know about it, a primary school teacher in France, she is now accusing a former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, of defamation because he was blaming primary school teachers for being lazy, for not working enough, having too many 6 months of holidays and not working enough. So you have a former head of state which is making that kind of speeches on public media, well, against teachers, primary school or any kind of teacher. So, of course, it doesn't help.
And also, maybe not in France, but maybe in Ireland or, I don't know, in Malta, maybe. Have we seen diversity increase, and maybe has that made teaching history a bit more, maybe not difficult, but maybe a little bit more sensitive, because you have to take in consideration different religions, different origins? Is that an issue in Ireland?
Yeah, and it's something that, well, it's welcomed in Ireland that we have great diversity within our classrooms, and for teachers it has great benefits in the class. There is the challenges around sensitivities, and very careful planning needs to go into the material that you're choosing. But I think that teachers get support in teaching sensitive issues. In Ireland, the department has a teacher professional support service called IJA, and this provides training for teachers, and they on a variety of topics related to the curriculum. One of those is related to teaching sensitive issues, and how teachers would plan issues to ensure that the voice of the students are recognised within the class and respected, and also that they can explore different historical topics in a sensitive way. Okay, so I think that in Ireland, particularly at lower secondary, the curriculum is designed in a way that the aim is to give students what we call is a big picture, like an overall understanding of historical events, and that helps them to delve more deeply into themes then. So themes that they would start to look at would be causation, sort of consequences. They look at multi-perspectivity, multi-perspectives of different events. And I think that's really important for students then when we're dealing with challenges that are facing our society today, and also, challenges that might be faced sometimes around areas of like racism or nationalism. But they, within the specification itself, those themes are also explored. Okay, and it creates that environment where students then start to understand kind of how modern events might have emerged, but within an environment that's safe. And teachers are certainly supported, and more support will be provided to them to help them in those diverse classrooms.
And another topic that I would like to discuss with you is, so we've talked about teachers' needs, maybe we can go further on that topic. What do they need from educational authorities to help them with these history classes? Is it more resources, obviously? Is it more support, smaller groups, more awareness on these topics that you've just mentioned? Anne-Laure, what do you think?
There is a strong need for PD, professional development. That's what the observatory report concluded, because in several European countries, teachers are complaining that they would need more PD, and the same in France. Now we have a more difficult access to that PD in France, because you have to do it only on Wednesday afternoon during your free time, when you're not face-to-face teaching with students, or it's online. So it can be dissuasive for teachers to attend those professional trainings. And of course, we have very good history teachers association in Europe who are doing an excellent job providing professional development, organizing webinars and so on. But it's always during, of course, the free time of teachers. And it's also difficult for teachers to have the authorization from their headmaster, headmistresses to leave school to go and attend professional training somewhere in Europe or in their own country, because they are supposed to be teaching, and that's all it is about.
So there's not always someone to replace them.
And so they're not thinking about the value the teacher can bring when they go to those trainings.
Do you have an insight on that, Luke?
It's a matter of providing the training in-house, maybe. There are certain topics, so for example, let's take racism, for example. Something that I do in my tours at Fort St. Angela with work is I have to tiptoe around the Islam. If I have people who are active members of Islam or practicing Islam, I have to tiptoe around the fact that the Order of St. John, as a Christian military order, used to undertake corsairing, and slavery was a part of that subject. So certain aspects can be brought in-house, certain approaches as to how slavery, for example, how would one terminology refer to it in the context of today's society, which is very sensitive about these topics, but also considering the fact that it's a part of history. We can't tiptoe around it, certain aspects of it, but we also have to consider the modern day approach to certain topics.
And if we go on the student side, what would their needs? What do students need in order to take more history classes and maybe, I don't know, be more inspired and motivated? Because you were saying, Luke, that there are not many people studying history. So what do students need, do you think?
I think we need a more interactivity. Something that we had, when I had history at school, up until Form 2, because then I wasn't allowed to take it. But anyway, we sat down, you have a book in front of you, and you're talking about the French Revolution, for example. Okay, all well and good, but how can you make a student understand more about the concept of the French Revolution? So something that I've been looking into, for example, is the use of gaming in history. To take an example, for example, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It has a interactive feature that you can play as the character, but in a documentary style mode, and you are seeing ancient Athens right in front of you. It gives you an idea of how you could you explain the history of the Peloponnesian War in that case. And you're saying, okay, Athens has the Acropolis. But at least through such interactive means, you're actually seeing the Acropolis as how we think it looked, so to speak. You're giving that the student a visual aid to what they're reading about, which is why I like to include a lot of archaeology in my own research, because I feel that if I'm researching Constantinople at the moment for my master's, and I mentioned the Theodosian walls, for example, I want to be able to see the stratigraphic layering of an excavation of the Theodosian walls, to be able to understand how these things were built. It's not just words on a paper saying it was a three-tier wall that stood the test of time, basically. You need to give those aids to the students to help them interact with what they're studying.
And is there anything else we can do to help students?
Yes, and I agree with what you're saying about it does need to be more active, okay? And you know, you need to generate the interest as well. Some students will naturally be interested. In Ireland, in lower secondary, as I mentioned about the changes in the curriculum, part of the assessment is called a classroom-based assessment, and in that students can choose a local study, and they present an artefact, and they do this research. And there's been great interest in this as the students, you know, some interview family members, some talk about a local thing that happened to them. If students are newcomers to Ireland, they can even talk about their own heritage, their own place that they came to. And when we speak to students about that experience, they talk about how it opened up conversations with family members. They got to go on visits to other areas, and they didn't know that monument that was on the street, exactly what it stood for or who the people were there. So this more tangible, active engagement, you know, that makes the history, it tells the stories, and there's an attachment to it, I think engages students a lot more than the static sitting at the textbook and you're reading page 4 and you're answering these questions. It's a very limited engagement. But also in Ireland, we have a year, it's quite unique to Ireland, it's called transition year. So in between lower secondary and upper secondary, it's 1 year that students can choose to engage with, and it's a school designed programme. The department does produce guidelines to guide the schools on how they make those programmes. So along with studying a couple of core subjects, history teachers are able to develop any program they wish their students to engage with. And there's some wonderful, innovative projects that I have been able to visit schools and to engage with students. So a lot of the time teachers will discuss with their students what topics they would like to do. A lot of students like to learn more about the Holocaust, of remembrance, and the History Teachers Association, along with the Holocaust Education Trust in Ireland, have developed resources for their transition year students that they can engage with these topics. A lot of it is around sort of testimonies, you know, sort of dealing with different perspectives, and there's not pressure on them to sit an exam. So when you remove the pressure of the exam and you allow students to engage in an innovative and creative way, the interest peaks. And that's where you get that real learning, that real authentic engagement with the sources. We are lucky as well that there is so much visuals that we can engage with, because that you do need to read, you do need to engage with the written text. But I think with our students nowadays, we need to have multimodal forms of information that we present in our class. And I think that engages them. And that's why my first point about teaching those skills of critical analysis are crucial, or else we're just showing them clips. You know, there has to be the analysis with it. The depth.
You're mentioning that in the 1980s, history was removed as an examinable subject in Malta, and because there weren't these aids to help stimulate the interest of history for the sake of history, it died out, and a social stigma developed that to go and study history is irrelevant to society, which is in reality the complete opposite. It develops critical thinking, as we've been saying, and allows you to analyze a situation, and you won't go with the flow, so to speak, in certain situations. But just to take that example, as you're saying, removing it as an examinable subject, but then not trying to stimulate it as a topic that can be studied in schools, had a drastic effect of creating the social stigma in Malta, at least. And something that we still see today. As I said, I mean, this year, 311 students sat for their O-level. If I'm not mistaken, about the total students sitting for their O-levels, so we're saying Form 5, is about 10,000 students, give or take. It's not even 1% of students who are not being able to choose. I mean, for example, when I was in Form 2, I was the only person who chose history. And they told me, no, you can't study it because we're not going to run the course for one person. Why not?
And maybe in a country like France, it's a bit, we were talking about adapting, I mean, making a step out of programs, but in countries like France, where we have such a strict program and rules, and like you were saying, Luke, if there's not enough students, we don't open a class, and we have a program we have to follow, and so maybe it's a bit difficult in some countries in Europe to do what you were talking about in Ireland.
Yeah, as I said, transition year is a very unique year for all the subjects, all the subjects, even the core subjects. They'll develop the program to meet the needs and the interests and the abilities of the students.
We need to take example on Ireland.
Before they go on to the set curriculums of upper secondary, and it's based on experiential learning, but they also get opportunities to do vocational work experience and lots of opportunities for them. But it is an opportunities for teachers to kind of really be creative, because sometimes they feel a little bit held back with the curriculum.
Yeah, teachers try to, of course, use more active pedagogies, for example, role plays or debate, very well prepared debate, but you need time to prepare a debate, and it's very good, very useful, because the students have to, empathize with the characters they're supposed to represent and stand for. I'm thinking of two very good projects. One is the Erasmus project, European project. It's called Parahistories, and the other one, Contested Histories. They are very useful for history teachers to study, especially controversial topics. Parahistories, you can use it if you want to teach about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Of course, who is going to dare use it? Well, it depends on your context, your environment, in which region or which town you teach sometimes. And you need 6 to 8 hours, in fact, to prepare one of the debate. But it's using multi-perspectivity, because students, they have to study primary sources. They have to study different points of views. The Israelis plural, the Palestinians plural again. It's not only a binary debate. And so it takes time, but in the end, they learn how to develop a complex approach of history. And Contested Histories, it's about it's a website, and you have a map with more than 500 case studies about monuments, statues, street names everywhere in the world which are contested, and you can also use it, in your town, in your city, with your an example from a local one.
The last topic we're going to talk about is the Council of Europe and the Observatory's work on these questions we've just mentioned. How does it advocate for better teaching of history? What exactly does it do?
I think the importance of the observatory of bringing together different member states to share their approaches, and that's the premise there, is to share how do we teach history in our countries, and by sharing how we teach history we can learn from each other, and it opens dialogue and discussion. For example, in Ireland at the moment we are currently redeveloping our upper secondary school, and history is one of the subjects that's being redeveloped. So the general report is something that's very important to us, because we're able to look at other countries, look at what's in their curriculum, and also through the observatory then make those connections with curriculum developers and with people from other countries to learn about their experiences. So it's really important to have the reports, particularly, we're going to have the report on the economic crisis, but looking at the pandemics, and we can see as we develop our curriculum where we can make improvements, what are the areas that are important to include for young people within our curriculum. So I think the observatory has a really important role in bringing that sharing of information across the different member states on how we engage with our students in history education. It also shines a light there as well around the influence of textbooks, and also maybe where we ourselves, might need more support for teachers in different resources or different areas. So it opens up debate in a very non-judgmental way, but as a way of sharing information, which is vital.
The purpose of the reports is not to give good points, good examples to countries, but to allow maybe policymakers to compare how history is taught, and maybe find some inspiration in what is being made in other country and what can be improved.
And what useful conclusions can be drawn from conferences you've worked on, for example?
Well, multiple multi-perspectivity is still maybe an objective to achieve in many countries. It's everywhere. Not everywhere. For example, it's not in Europe, but I have some colleagues coming back from a Boston Congress, and definitely not in the United States. But we're working on it in Europe. But it's very difficult because again, it's about primary sources. We need to use primary sources from different contexts, points of views. So there is this need, and it's basically very important also to raise interest from students, because I remember I had this student who was very, very, very impatient to have the lesson about the Algerian War of Independence, because you say, in France, usually we don't teach that topic very well or too very fast. And so I told her, I'm going to use a multi-perspective approach, and we're going to use, of course, Algerian documents and so on, not only the French side and different actors. And then she was so quiet because she discovered something new, and she had nothing to complain for once. So maybe I would say multi-perspectivity could be really improved everywhere.
And what useful conclusions can be drawn from conferences and reports, do you think?
I think, we're here today at the annual conference of the Observatory, so I might discuss the work of the Observatory. I think that it's, the whole idea of the Observatory is for member states to come together and identify how is history taught in each of the member states, and to share the practice that's taught. It's non-judgmental. Okay. And there's each of the conferences and each of the reports, there's a huge amount of information that is now available. If you take the general report on curriculum, on teacher education, on the different areas that students are studying, on their assessment. And for example, in Ireland, we're redeveloping our senior cycle curriculum at the moment, all subjects, and history being one of those. It's really interesting to be able to look at that information and see what we can learn from the experiences of other countries. So in particular then when they're followed up with the conferences, areas that maybe you asked earlier about sensitive issues, we can see how these are taught and how they're managed, and what learning we can get from other countries. What role does the history of minorities play in the curriculum? That's another area that we've discussed and we've looked at in conferences, and I think it's a great way to share information for curriculum developers, for policymakers, even for teachers to come together and to take the learning from the different countries. And I think the Observatory is contributing to that with their methodological approach that the Scientific Advisory Council has overseen in the development of those reports.
Well, thank you so much for your insight on this topic, I'm sure. Let's hope that students want to study history again in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this discussion and wish to explore more topics, be sure to check out the episodes of Europe Explained. You can learn more about the Council of Europe and its initiatives at our website, coe.int. And don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates and insights. You can find us on X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.